Now that we've described what the food and fiber industry is, let's dive into some of the trends in the food and fiber industry. Specifically in this video, we're going to talk about the number and size of farms. And right now what we're seeing is there is a trend that there are fewer but larger farms. There are less farms out there, but they're growing in size. To illustrate that, we're going to talk about the number of farms. In 1935, there were 6.8 million farms. This was the peak in number of farms. This was the most farms in the United States that it has ever seen. Now, we're looking at 2.1 million farms. Where are all these farms going? Did we truly lose, what would be 4.7 million farms? Where are they going? What's going on with that land? Well, what we're seeing is we're not really losing those farms. They're just being absorbed into larger farms. We're taking several small farms and absorbing it into one. And the number of farms, just the raw numbers of them, even though it's been decreasing since 1935, those numbers really, they began to stabilize around 1974. About 1974, those numbers weren't dropping off as much. And especially since the 1990s, those numbers have began to even stabilize even more. And even though we're at 2.1 million farms right now, you see those numbers increase and decrease just a little bit about every year, rather than facing a steady drop. So we talked a little bit about it, and we're saying that those smaller farms, or those number of farms, are being absorbed into, say, larger farms. Well, to illustrate that, let's look at the size of farms. And what we've noticed is that the number of acres of a farm, the average acre size, has increased from 200 to 400 acres since World War II. So that's what's going on here. These number of farms, these farms really aren't going away. They're just being absorbed, and they're going from smaller farms of, say, average of 200 acres to larger farms, and we're seeing those average acreage per farm increase. And then since the 1990 to 2015, the average acreage ranged anywhere from 418 to 464 acres. And currently, right now, we're seeing that the average farm size is 440 acres. But I want you to keep in mind, these are all averages. Whenever we talk about all these numbers up here, the average farm size, these are all averages. But how many of you know an average farmer? And what I mean by that is averages can be misleading. So how many farmers do you know that have exactly 440 acres? But by the same token, how many farmers do you know have a lot more than 440 acres? Or how many of them do you know that have less than 440 acres? Well, they're just basically taking all of the agricultural production land, the number of acres in the United States, dividing it by the total number of farms, come up with this 440 acres. But in reality, farmers are not averages. That many have more and many have less land. So to understand the agricultural industry and the food and fiber industry, we've got to break it down a little bit more. So let's look a little bit closer at the breakdown of farms. And what we notice is that 60%, over half of the farms in the United States, have sales less than $10,000. So over 60% have sales less than $10,000. If you were able to sell a steer at $1,000 a head, and you sold 10 steers, or less than 10 steers, you are considered part of the 60%. If you've got just a few animals or just a small area of cropland and you're farming just a little bit, there's a good chance you might be in this range of this 60% of the farmers. That's not a lot of value whenever it comes to ag production in all reality. So this 60% of U.S. farms, it only accounts for 3% of the value of ag products. So here we have over half, 60% of U.S. farms accounts for only 3% of the value of ag products. It's not a lot because they're all small farms. On the other hand, 2% of U.S. farms have sales that are in the millions of dollars. And these 2%, the largest 2% of U.S. farms, account for a large portion of the value of ag products. These large farms are producing the majority of the agricultural products here in the United States. Even though there might be a lot more of these smaller farms, they're not producing at the same quantity as these large farms, especially in terms of value. So as we look at large-scale farms, something to notice is that these large-scale farms are increasing, maybe not necessarily in size, but in value. And that the share of the total farm receipts, the total value of ag products, the total amount of ag products that are sold and the total value of that is the total farm receipts. And the share that the largest 2% has is increasing. So what that means is they are starting to increase the amount, maybe not necessarily increase the amount that they sell, but they're increasing the value. And the value that they sell is increasing. They're obtaining a larger portion, a larger percentage of this share of the total farm receipts, meaning that they're growing in size. Another aspect to keep in mind is that these large farms, what we consider large farms, are only 10% of the farms. But by that same token, they make up 75% of the value of ag products. The large farms are only 10% of the farms, but they sell 75% of the value. So these small farms sell 3%, large farms sell 75%. That means that the medium-sized farms make up about 22% of the total value of ag products. So what does this all mean? Farmers, the number of farms are have been decreasing but have leveled off recently, and the size of farms is increasing. But by the same token, the large farms are the ones that are producing the vast amount of the ag value, whereas the small farms, they're not producing all that much in terms of value of agricultural products.